Well, let's open our Bibles again to the Gospel of John in chapter 11. John chapter 11. Last time I spoke, we began looking at this glorious account of the Lord Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. This is certainly one of Jesus' greatest miracles, and the Apostle John records it for us in great detail. And since it's been a couple of weeks, and some of you weren't here a couple of weeks ago, I think it'd be good if we read the whole account again of the miracle that was accomplished here in John chapter 11. So stand up if you'd like to, and we'll read from this chapter. John chapter 11. If you don't have a Bible, there's always more back in the bookcase there you're welcome to use. John chapter 11 and verse 1. Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, of the village of Mary and her sister Martha. And it was Mary, who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. The sisters therefore sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. But when Jesus heard it, he said, This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified by it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. When therefore he heard that he was sick, he stayed then 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this he said to the disciples, Let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. This he said, and after that he said to them, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go that I may awaken him out of sleep. The disciples therefore said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought he was speaking of literal sleep. Then Jesus therefore said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Thomas therefore is called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, Let us also go, that we may die with him. So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. Martha, therefore, when she heard that Jesus was coming, went to meet him, but Mary still sat in the house. Martha, therefore, said to Jesus, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. Even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, Your brother shall rise again. Martha said to him, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me shall live even if he dies, and everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, Yes, Lord. I have believed that you are the Christ, the Son of God, even he who comes into the world. And when she had said this, she went away and called Mary, her sister, saying secretly, The teacher is here. He's calling for you. And when she heard it, she arose quickly and was coming to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha met him. The Jews then, who were with her in the house and consoling her, when they saw that Mary rose up quickly and went out, followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to weep there. Therefore, when Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him and fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews who were with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and was troubled, and said, Where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. And so the Jews were saying, Behold how he loved him. But some of them said, Could not this man who opened the eyes of him who was blind have kept this man also from dying? Jesus, therefore, again, being deeply moved within, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, Remove the stone. Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, Did I not say to you, if you believe, you will see the glory of God? And so they removed the stone. And Jesus raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou heardest me, and I know that thou hearest me always. but because of the people standing around I said it, that they may believe that thou didst send me. And when he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. He who had died came forth, bound hand and foot with wrappings, and his face was wrapped around with a cloth. Jesus said to him, unbind him and let him go. And we'll stop there. You may be seated. Last time we just began looking at the first section of this story in verses 1 through 16. The things that happen before Jesus actually gets to the town of Bethany where Lazarus lived. And we focused last time on just two thoughts. The first was that Jesus has favorites. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, they were favorites of Jesus. It points out how much he loved these three siblings. He had a special, close, intimate relationship with these three. And we just talked about how this is true of every Christian. If you're a Christian, you're a favorite of Jesus. He loves you. You are special to Him. It's a great thought. And then the second thing we talked about last time was that we have here a beautiful example of intercessory prayer. These sisters, they send this messenger out to find Jesus, and the message is very simple. It's, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. They're bringing the sickness of Lazarus, they're bringing this problem to Jesus. That's what we do in prayer. We can bring other people's needs and problems to the Lord. Say, Lord, he whom you love is sick. He whom you love is in trouble. He whom you love needs a job, or needs to be sanctified, or whatever the need is, needs to be encouraged. We can do that as well. So we covered those things last time. And today then we move on to a third remarkable thing we see in this early part of the story. And I want to focus today on Jesus' delay. Jesus' delay. Jesus' delayed response to this prayer. Here the sisters send this petition, this message to Jesus in verse 3 about their brother being sick. It was an urgent need that was there. And Jesus responds positively in verse 4. He says, the sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God. But then in verse 6 it says, when therefore he heard that he was sick, he stayed then 2 days longer in the place where he was. And then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. Jesus doesn't immediately drop everything he's doing and go rushing down to Bethany to be there with Lazarus and the sisters. That's what Mary and Martha were hoping for. That's what they were expecting, I think, when they sent this message. If the guy can finally get to Jesus, Jesus will rush down and do something. But Jesus doesn't rush down, does he? It doesn't say that he was in the midst of some big crisis over where he was ministering and he just couldn't get away. But he just intentionally, deliberately decided, hey, I can't go. I won't go. I'm staying here another 2 days. He delayed a while longer. And what happened during those 2 days of delay? What happened? Lazarus died. He died during those 2 days. Up in verse 4, when Jesus speaks of it, talks about his sickness. Lazarus was just sick at that point. But after the 2 days, he's saying in verse 14, Lazarus is dead. Lazarus died during that delay. And you can imagine how the delay looked and felt to these two sisters, to Mary and Martha. Here they go to all the trouble to send a messenger up to Jesus, hoping to get to him just in time. And then Jesus doesn't come. He doesn't come down and heal their brother like they had hoped. You can imagine them waiting for Jesus, thinking, well, surely he'll be there tomorrow morning. And then tomorrow morning he's not there, and they think, well, surely he'll be here in the evening, and he's not. And they think, well, surely he'll be here tomorrow, and he's still not. And he doesn't come, and he doesn't come. How must that have felt to them? And their brother Lazarus gets weaker and sicker, and finally dies, and they bury him. And he's in the tomb 4 days when Jesus finally shows up. In verse 17. And when Jesus arrives, both sisters have the same thought, don't they? Martha, in verse 21, she says, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. If you could just have gotten here in time, I know my brother wouldn't have died. And then Mary comes out and she says exactly the same thing in verse 32. Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. Reminds me of a Western movie in which the wagon train is going across the plains and they come under Indian attack. And they're able to send out a messenger to the fort nearby. There's always a convenient fort, right? And the message to the guys at the fort is, we're in trouble, come and help us. And then in the next scene, the cavalry comes riding across the plains and usually in the movies, the cavalry gets there just in time, right, to rescue the beleaguered wagon train people. What happens in this story, though, is Jesus doesn't get there in time. Jesus doesn't save the day in the way that the sisters were hoping for. And it seems when he arrives that all is lost now. And it's a scene of just complete mourning and over the loss of Lazarus. Surely during this delay, the sisters had to be wondering, did Jesus misunderstand the situation? Did Jesus not understand how serious this was? Did Jesus make a mistake here in His judgment? And even worse, surely they wondered, what does this say about Jesus' love for us? I thought we were really special to Jesus. I thought we could send somebody to Jesus and say, Lord, one whom you love is sick. And that would be enough. I mean, that love thing would be enough to cause Jesus to come and heal our brother and save him. But apparently He doesn't love us that much. Apparently that wasn't as strong of a relationship as we thought. You can imagine the temptations that those sisters were going through during those 2 days. Is it really worth it to trust God? Does prayer really matter? Does God really love me? Is God really good? Those kind of accusations. And they're going through that for 2 extra days. They're facing these kind of thoughts, this emotional anguish, shedding bitter tears surely. 2-day delay. Why? It seems cruel, doesn't it? Maybe that's too harsh of a word. It seems at least unloving, uncaring or something on Jesus' part. Why would He put these sisters through these 2 days of misery and all these questions and things? Why would He do it? Well, that's the question I want to deal with today. I want to suggest this morning 4 answers, 4 reasons for Jesus' unexpected delay in this case of Lazarus. The first thing I want to mention, and this won't take long, is that Jesus would not have gotten to Lazarus before he died anyway. Jesus still wouldn't have gotten there in time. Now, in my own mind, before I started studying the chapter this time, my own mind, I had thought, yeah, if Jesus had not delayed, He could have got down there in time and He could have healed Lazarus, but He just chose not to. But that doesn't work. That doesn't fit the facts of the story, because in verse 17, when Jesus shows up, Lazarus has already been in the tomb for 4 days. So you see, even if He had not delayed, we subtract those 2 days off the timeline, then Lazarus still would have been dead for 2 days when Jesus arrived. Lazarus would have been just as dead either way. So it must have been Jesus was pretty far away, maybe 3 or 4 days journey on foot. Jesus traveled exclusively on foot. Now, if he could have hopped on a chariot or something, He could have got there a lot faster. But Jesus just traveled by walking. And so after making the journey, Lazarus had been dead now for 4 days. So from the sisters' perspective, Jesus' delay caused them this additional emotional distress and probably challenged their faith, like we talked about a few minutes ago. But the 2-day delay did not put them through a bereavement that they otherwise would not have had. So it's important to point that out if we start thinking that this delay appears cruel. A second reason for the delay, and this one is more important, and that is the delayed showed who was in charge of Jesus' schedule. His delay showed who was in charge of Jesus' schedule. Jesus' schedule, Jesus' agenda was set by who? It was set by God. It was set by the Father. And Jesus constantly referred to this. We've seen it as we've gone through the Gospel of John. He constantly talked about, I'm doing what the Father has sent me to do. I do nothing on my own initiative, but only what I see the Father doing. He makes this emphasis. I'm just traveling here in lockstep with the will of God the Father. And so when the sisters send their desperate message to Jesus, they undoubtedly hoped He would drop everything and come to their aid. That was their desire. That's what they thought was best. But Jesus, by delaying, He shows that He was not going to be forced into doing something just because other people wanted Him to do that. Even people that He loved very much, as we talked about last time. They were not going to manipulate Him into acting before He realized it was time to act by the Father's direction and will. And Jesus made this point clear throughout His ministry. There are other times when people tried to push Him to do things based on a close relationship with Him, and He resisted those efforts. He made it clear that the things He did and the timing of when He did those things was entirely at the direction of God and not anybody else pushing Him along. Can you think of those times? We've already had two of them in the Gospel of John, when one of Jesus' family members was trying to get Him to do something, and He pushed back on that. Well, one of them is back in John chapter 2. We can just turn over to this perhaps for a minute. John 2, it's Jesus at the wedding of Cana. John 2, verse 3, it says, "And when the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to Him, 'They have no wine.'" And apparently, there was more to it than what we read here in these words, but it was apparent that Jesus' mother Mary realizes there's this problem. They've run out of wine at the wedding, and she comes to Jesus hoping and kind of pushing Jesus in some way to do something. Jesus, you could do something about this. You ought to do something. That's what He felt, even though we don't see it in the words here. That there was something presumptuous about this. That Mary is saying, hey, because I'm your mom, you ought to do this thing. You ought to do a miracle here. Now, Jesus planned on doing a miracle anyway, but He wanted it to be clear He was doing it because God said so, not because His mom was putting pressure on Him. And so His response to Mary is kind of shocking here. Verse 4, Jesus said to her, "Woman, what have I to do with you? My hour is not yet come." He says, look, I'm on God's schedule. I'm on God's time frame here. You don't need to push me along. He doesn't call her mom, He just calls her woman there, pointing that out. Another example of this is in John 7. In this case, it's not Jesus' mom, it's Jesus' brothers that try to push Him along and get Him to do something. John 7, verse 3 says, His brothers, these are His actual physical brothers of Jesus. His brothers, therefore, said to Him, "Depart from here, go into Judea, that your disciples also may behold your works which you are doing. For no one does anything in secret when he himself seeks to be known publicly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world." For not even His brothers were believing in Him. So here we have Jesus, at this time, unbelieving brothers, and they come to Him giving Him ministry advice. They say, Jesus, you ought to be doing these miracles that you supposedly do. You ought to do these miracles on the big stage down in Judea where everybody can see you, where you can be famous. You ought to go down there. And Jesus again pushes back against that advice from them. He says in verse 6, "My time is not yet at hand, but your time is always opportune." He wants to make it clear He's not going to do something because they want Him to. He's going to do it because of God's time schedule. That's what He's acting on. Well, these things get really practical for us too, don't they? because we often want to do the same things that the people in these three accounts try to do, and that is try to hurry God along. Get God to do things when we think they need to happen and what we think need to happen. We want God to have the good sense to get lined up with our agenda, to get on the path with us. Because we've figured out what needs to happen here, and we want God to hurry up and do it our way. And we get all impatient with God, and we start doubting God's wisdom and His love, maybe even doubting His existence, because we've been praying about this thing and wanting this thing to happen for so long, and it's not happening fast enough. God just isn't moving quick enough for our purposes. And when God does this, when God puts the brakes on, when God doesn't act as quick as we want Him to, what it forces us to do is come face to face with the reality of God's sovereignty. God is in charge of things and not me. And that's what we see here in John 11 with Jesus' delay. He's saying, I'm in charge of this. God is in charge of this, not you. Yes, I understand what you want me to do, but I'm sovereign here. God is sovereign over this. The Almighty God of the universe will not be hurried along, will not be manipulated by us into acting a certain way and please us. God is in charge 100%. He has His plan, and He'll do it His way, and we're not going to be able to force Him to act before He's good and ready to do it. Instead, we've got to learn to do what these sisters learned here, and that is, you've got to submit to the Lord. You've got to trust in Him and His wisdom and His goodness, even when He doesn't do things as fast and in the way that we're hoping that He will. All of us are waiting on God for things right now. All of us have prayed for things, maybe for a long time, that have not happened yet. God hasn't done them yet. I mean, all of us, Christians in this room that I know of, we have loved ones that are lost. There's people in our families that are lost that we've prayed for years, many, many, many times, and they're still not converted. We're still waiting to see them brought in and saved. Some of us have prayed many times for God to pour out His Spirit in revival, and we've not seen that happen either. Single Christians often get impatient because they want very much to get married. Married Christians often become impatient because they want children and they don't have children yet. They're waiting on that. Maybe God delays in giving you the job that you want. Maybe God delays in giving you the ministry position that you think that you're supposed to have. Maybe God delays in things in our church that we think ought to happen by now. And so we have all these things, all these ideas how we think things ought to work. And it comes back, no, we've got to humbly submit to God's time frame in things, to bow our head to Him, bow the knee to Him. And it takes real faith to do this, to trust and wait God's timing for things. I mean, we know God is wise. We know God is perfectly wise. And what that means is that however God does things is the absolute best way. Right? He wouldn't be perfectly wise if there'd be a better way to do things than how God does them. So if you want things to happen differently than God does, then your way is by definition worse, right? It's going to make things worse because God's way is the perfect way for things to go. If God followed our timing, the end result would be worse. And so when we find ourselves in this place, like the sisters, wondering about God's delay in our life, we simply have to trust Him that He has good and wise reasons for doing what He does. Well, a third reason for Jesus' delay here, and that is that the delay brought greater glory to God. It brought greater glory to God. Jesus says that in verse 4. He talks about the glory of God. When Jesus heard about Lazarus being sick, He said, "This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified by it." Already here at verse 4, Jesus knew what he was going to do. Jesus knew how the story was going to turn out with Lazarus. And he says the sickness is not unto death. Now we all know Lazarus died. So how can this be? Well, Jesus means is that the end result of this thing with Lazarus is not death. And Lazarus is going to pass through death briefly. The end result is going to be glory. The end result is going to be resurrection and life. And so Jesus is looking through this whole process to the end of it. It says it's not unto death. It's not ending with death. Death is not the end of the story here. But it is tending toward, is going toward. The end result is the glory of God. This whole scenario is all about bringing out the glory of God, showing forth the excellence and wonderfulness of God. And in order for that to happen, Lazarus has got to get terribly sick and suffer and die so that God can get glory in the end, so His glory can shine the most brightly. The point of the whole story, where the whole story is headed, is the glory of God, Jesus said. And he actually goes a step further. He doesn't just say it's the glory of God or the glory of the Father, but he says specifically that the Son of God may be glorified by it. It's His own glory involved. And He puts His own glory at the same level as the glory of God the Father, one of many ways that He points to His own deity, His own equality with God that we just see throughout the book of John here, such that you kind of take it for granted. Jesus just talks like that the Son is going to receive glory in the same level as the Father through raising Lazarus from the dead. God is going to get greater glory in Lazarus being dead for 4 days and then being raised from the dead than the glory He would have gotten had Jesus been able to hop on a chariot and get down there just in time before Lazarus expired and heal him right there at the last moment. There would be glory in that, but there's going to be more glory in what happens with Lazarus dying and then being raised up from the dead again. There's a greater display of how wonderful and powerful God is, how glorious the life-giving power of Christ is. When everybody sees this dead man come staggering out of the tomb with his grave clothes on him, the glory of God is going to be seen. People all the time ask why questions about God, about why God does stuff. I mean, we get these questions. You try to witness to people. Everybody's got why questions about, maybe it's from their own life. It's like, why did God allow this bad thing to happen? There was this little girl in our family and she got sick and died or something. Why did God allow that to happen? Or maybe it's a little more metaphysical and it's, why did God allow sin into the world in the first place? Why did God allow evil? Couldn't God have prevented it? Why did God allow it? That's a big question in philosophy. Maybe it's a question like this. Why doesn't God save everybody in the world? He could have saved everybody, but He just saved some people, and other people don't get saved and they perish in their sins. Why does God do it like that? People ask all these why questions about God, and they're not very profitable. But there's one basic answer for why God does what He does. And it's the answer given here, and that is He does things for His own glory. He does things to bring glory to Himself, and He has worked things out. He has this great plan for all of history, and it's all calculated and calibrated to bring the maximum amount of glory to Himself, for people to see the excellence and wonderfulness of God in all different ways, all over the place. That's why God does the things that He does. And He sometimes has people suffer greatly as part of the process of bringing glory to Himself. It's what we see here with Lazarus. He suffers and dies. God gets the glory. And remember, we saw the same thing back in John 9. We had there the man who was born blind, he says. And so here's this man who's never been able to see in his life. He's lived his whole life with this serious disability of blindness. His parents have gone through this. He's gone through this. And so the disciples come to this poor guy by the road there, and they have the question, which man sinned to cause this man to be born blind? Did his parents sin? Did he sin somehow? Jesus says, you're looking at the wrong way. It's not a matter of who sinned, but the reason for this man's blindness was that the works of God might be displayed in him. It's an amazing thought. Jesus is saying this man and his family went through all this for all these years to come to this point years later for Jesus, the Lord of glory, to happen past and be able to heal that guy and give him his sight and bring glory to himself through it. It's for the glory of God. What do you think of a God like that? A God who is constantly arranging things to get glory for Himself. This makes some people uncomfortable to have a God like that. And the way they think is, if that was one of us living our life that way, that'd be bad, right? If Evan here decided he was going to live his life in order to get the most glory he could for himself, you'd say, that sounds wrong. That sounds just like pride and egotism. And that'd be a bad way for Evan to live for his own glory. So why isn't it bad for God to do things that way? Why isn't it bad for God to work everything for His own glory, His own purposes that way? Well, the answer is very simple. The difference is very simple. That is, Evan doesn't deserve very much glory, right? None of us deserve glory, but God is infinitely worthy of all glory. He deserves all glory. We don't deserve any glory. God deserves it all. And so it's just right, it's just fitting, it's just proper for God to receive all the praise and all the attention because He deserves it. We don't deserve it. That's why it's bad for us to be trying to get the glory. In Revelation 4, I think, verse 11, there's this song of the 24 elders there, this vision of heaven. And they say, "Worthy art Thou." They're praising God. They say, "Worthy art Thou, our Lord and our God, to receive glory and honor and power." They say, you're worthy to receive the glory and the honor and the power. You're worthy of it. You deserve it. Yeah. Why? They say, "For Thou didst create all things, and because of Thy will they existed and were created." That's one very basic difference, isn't it? God's the Creator. He's made us. He gives us every breath we breathe. He's given us every good thing that we have. Evan here, he's just a creature, but God's the Creator, right? And so when we as creatures seek glory for ourselves, we're actually robbing glory from God who deserves it. We're trying to get some of God's glory for ourselves here. Anything praiseworthy, anything good in me, if you've seen anything good in my life ever, it's because God in His mercy has put it there. It's God in His mercy and His power that's given me any good qualities that you might see in me. And so don't praise me for those things. Praise Him. That's where it came from. God is worthy of all the praise. There's a line that comes up different time in the Psalms. I'm reading here from Psalm 29, verse 1. It says, "Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due to His name." It's the glory due to Him. It's the glory owed to Him. It's the glory that God deserves to have. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about giving Him something He doesn't really deserve. But no, we're talking about falling way short of giving God the glory that's due His name. So that's a third reason for Jesus' delay here in the case of Lazarus, is that by delaying, God was getting greater glory for Himself than He otherwise would have. And then a fourth reason, this is the last one we'll talk about, and that is that the delay strengthened the faith of the believers. That's a fourth reason for the delay. It strengthened the faith of believers. That Jesus' delay wasn't just good for God in getting more glory for Himself, it was also good for the Christians in the story. They all benefit from this delay in the long run. He It was because of Jesus' love for them and concern for the Christians in the story that He delayed and put them through that process. And the text actually says that. Look again, John 11, verse 5. It says, "Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. When therefore He heard that he was sick, He stayed there 2 days longer in the place where He was." That word "therefore" is utterly shocking. You don't expect that. I mean, it's like it's saying the opposite of what you think it's going to say. You think it's going to say, Jesus loved these people so much, so in spite of His love for them, He stayed longer. But instead it's the word "therefore." Instead it means because. He says He loved them so much because of His love for them, He stayed 2 days longer. He delayed because He loved them. That's the connection we're showed here. So how can this be? How can love cause someone to delay flying to the aid of someone that's in trouble that you really care about? Well, the answer is that the delay accomplished something better for them. He was giving them something better by waiting a little bit before He went down to Bethany. I think we're given the answer for what that better thing was. A few verses down, verse 14, as Jesus speaks to His disciples, He says, "Jesus therefore said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." And again, this is shocking language. I mean, here's Jesus. His close friend Lazarus has just died. And Jesus says, I'm glad. I'm glad he died and I wasn't there. I mean, you don't expect that. You expect him to say, well, Lazarus has died and I'm so sad. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there. I'm so sorry it worked out. I was way on the other side of the country here and I couldn't be there for my friend and I couldn't be there to comfort them. But Jesus doesn't say. He says, I was glad. I was glad that I couldn't be there to heal him, I think is what he means, before he died. And then he explains the reason for this surprising sentiment. He says, I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there. He's not saying it was better for me, but he's saying it's better for you guys that I wasn't there. And then he gives the reason why it's better for him. He says, so that you may believe. So that you guys, you disciples that he was talking to, so you guys will believe. Now these disciples were already believers. I mean, they're already all saved except for Judas. They've left everything. They're following Jesus. They're committed to Jesus. But their faith, as we so often see, is still very weak faith. And Jesus is saying, look, the way this is going to work out is going to be for the strengthening of your faith. When we get through this thing with Lazarus, you're going to believe in me like you've never believed before. And so he's saying, look, it's good for your faith that this all happens like this. You know, it was right around this time, I tried to look up, the sequence of things between the Gospels, but it was right around this time, it's recorded in Luke 17, where the disciples asked Jesus, increase our faith. And it's like he's saying, here, I'm doing it. Okay, you want your faith increased? Okay, we're going to increase your faith. And it's going to involve Lazarus dying. We pray this way sometimes, don't we? I mean, in the prayer meeting on Thursday night, there were guys praying this, Lord, increase our faith. Do we realize what we're asking for? Maybe somebody's going to have to die like Lazarus did so your faith can be increased. Maybe there's going to be some horrible trial that's going to come in your family, and God's going to use that to increase our faith as we go through that. That's a lot of the way faith grows, as we're stretched into new areas of trusting God. And it's like God uses these circumstances often to do that. It's like we're used to trusting God for certain things, in certain areas. We're used to praying about certain things. I know for myself, I'm used to praying about work. You know, when I used to work in St. Louis, it's like I would pray every day, it seemed like, for the stresses and problems of the day. I'm used to that. I'm used to praying about my sermons. I have a confidence if I'm stuck on a sermon issue that I'm going to pray about this and God's going to help me. Because He has so many times. I have a confidence about that. And everybody in the story here had a confidence that if Jesus could just get there while Lazarus wasn't dead yet, if He could just get there right at the end, no matter how bad off Lazarus was, Jesus could heal him. Everybody's confident Jesus could heal him if he was still alive. But now that he's dead, they don't have much confidence that there's any hope now. And so Jesus arrives, and it's just this scene of mourning and devastation and sadness. You see that? They had faith for one kind of scenario, but not for the other scenario, not for a resurrection from the dead. But they actually should have. They actually should have had faith in a resurrection. Jesus had already, hints at it rather strongly. Verse 4, He says, "This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God." Well, Jesus said that, and now here's Lazarus dead. It's like, well, how can this be? Is Jesus' prediction false? Well, that's a pretty serious problem, isn't it? Jesus is saying things that are not coming true. That shakes your faith. He must mean something's going on beyond the physical death. And then what He says in verse 11, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go that I may awaken him out of sleep." They should have been thinking resurrection. I bet He's going to do something like that. They've seen Jesus raise people from the dead already at least twice. There was the widow's son in this town of Nain, and then Jairus' little daughter that dies while Jesus is going to heal her. And in both of those cases, Jesus raised them from the dead. Now that was kind of the same day they died, probably. This is 4 days later, so this is a more challenging situation. And it could be, in this area of faith, it could be that Martha had the strongest faith of the bunch here. And listen to what she says over in verse 22. Verse 21, "Martha therefore said to Jesus, 'Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died.'" See, everybody's confident Jesus could have healed Lazarus. But then she goes on with something hopeful. She says, "Even now, even though he's been dead 4 days, even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you." It's like she has at least a glimmer of hope that He might be there to raise a brother from the dead. Right. And so there's some faith here. We don't know exactly what everybody was thinking. When Jesus gathered them there around that tomb and they rolled the stone away, but what a mighty experience that was for the faith of every one of those believers. Can you imagine being at the tomb of Lazarus? The stone is rolled away. There's the stench of death is talked about here. Can imagine that. And Jesus, he prays to the Father a little bit, and then He commands Lazarus, "Come forth." And here's Lazarus. Lazarus comes shuffling, stumbling out of that tomb. He had something over his face. He was all bound up. He couldn't see where he was going. He couldn't walk very well, surely. But Lazarus is alive. He comes walking out of there. What glory. How encouraging, how revolutionary that would be to your faith, wouldn't it? You'd be changed forever if you saw that. You would pray differently for the rest of your life if you were there and experienced that kind of mighty deliverance from the Lord. And so the 2-day delay, it impacted, it increased the impact of the miracle on everybody's faith. The delay confirmed Lazarus is really dead. He's not just a sick man recovering. It can't be a hoax, obviously. It made clear that this was such a major miracle. Only God, only the power of God could do such a thing. The delay of Jesus that appeared only to increase the suffering of the people He loved actually was an act of love intended to bless them, with a greater spiritual blessing than they could have gotten any other way in the story. God really does work all things together for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. It didn't look like it at the time when those sisters were going through those 2 days of waiting for Jesus to show up. It didn't look like it. It didn't feel like it, but it was. It was love. It was being worked together for good for them. God, in His omniscience and in His wisdom, is often aiming at different goals than we are in the trial. I mean, what's our goal? When you're in the fire, when you're going through a hard time, what is your goal? Your goal is get this over with, right? Get it. I want to get out of the fire. I want to get back to normal. I want my comforts restored. Well, maybe that's not God's goal. Maybe God's got more things to accomplish. God's got more blessings to give you. God's got more things He's going to do in your faith, in your heart, through the trial, and you might have to stay in it longer than you want to in order for all that to be accomplished. His goals might be bigger and better for you than you ever imagined, and that's how it was for these believers. So 4 thoughts about Jesus' delay. First, the delay did not actually cause Lazarus to die. Secondly, the delay showed who was in charge of Jesus' schedule, that He's sovereign over all things, and certainly over what He does. Thirdly, the delay was for the glory of God, to enhance God's glory, which is the reason God does everything He does. And then fourthly, the delay was for the good of the believers. It was to enhance their faith. And boy, I just find these things really practical in my own walk with the Lord. I mean, don't all of us struggle with God's timing in things? I mean, haven't we all been frustrated with God's delays in answering our prayers? You know, so often God just doesn't seem to be in as much of a hurry as we are for things to happen. How do we handle that? Maybe we've been in situations of human suffering. Here is somebody suffering. God, don't you love them? Look at how they're suffering here. Why don't you cut it short? Why don't you bring it to an end? Why don't you heal them? Why don't you do this thing that I want you to do? And the suffering keeps continuing. Why? We ask the question. Well, this addresses that. We may see things in the providence of God that appear cruel or appear unwise, uncaring, unloving. But here we have an answer of what's going on behind the scenes. God is seeing the whole picture a lot more clearly than any of us can see it. There is a purpose in it all. God is aiming at bigger, better goals than we can ever imagine. He is doing things for His own glory and for the good of His people. Especially the spiritual good of His people. He's bringing us into a deeper relationship with Himself at the end of the day than we ever would have had otherwise. Well, there's a William Cooper hymn that we need to sing that is unfortunately never in our songbooks. Every time I look, it's not there. And so it's on me to add it to the white book. But at least let me read the words in closing. I think it addresses in a poetic way exactly the issue we're talking about today. The difficult to explain aspects of God's providence and God's delays. The hymn says this: God moves in a mysterious way, His wonders to perform. He plants His footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. Deep in unfathomable minds of never-failing skill, He treasures up His bright designs and works His sovereign will. Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds ye so much dread are big with mercy and shall break with blessings on your head. So you see these storm clouds coming and you're scared. Oh no, this is just going to be terrible. And the clouds break open and they're full of mercy, falling all over you. Judge not the Lord by feeble sense, but trust Him for His grace. Now by feeble sense, He means just, the way we see things in our feeble weak understanding. Judge not the Lord by feeble sense, but trust Him for His grace. Behind a frowning providence He hides a smiling face. His purposes will ripen fast, unfolding every hour. The bud may have a bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower. Blind unbelief is sure to err and scan His works in vain. The unbeliever looks around and says, I don't see God anywhere in the picture. God is His own interpreter, and He will make it plain. He makes it plain, clear to the eyes of faith, and so often we can see it in hindsight, just like these sisters saw it. At the end of the day, they saw, I understand. It all makes perfect sense now why Jesus did it that way. Well, amen. We'll close with that.